Let's start with some sound. So this is something I've been developing since COVID, since the end of 2020. I bought this thing. This is a breath controller comes from a company in Sweden. It senses the strength of your blowing. That's what a breath controller does. This one also it senses head movement, which I was using in that piece. So that's one of the things I got. And then I gradually started to put together software to go with this, building my own software in Max MSP, that is. I then got this little thing, which is the Genki Ring. You can see it there. It's a device that has 3 main degrees of freedom. So it's to use the terminology they use in airplanes, yaw, pitch, and roll. So roll is like this. Actually, Genki calls it tilt. This is the tilt like this. And then you also pan. So you've got 3 dimensions of control. And then I used a couple of other things, foot pedals and things. So I started messing with this in 2020, and I've been building software. And I call this the Poikilophone. I'll show you 3 different, I've got about 4 different instruments. I don't even know what to call it. I'm not sure if it's really can be called an instrument. It's more like, if you like, a kind of meta instrument, because I'm not creating the controllers, I'm buying those, but then I'm creating my own software that's kind of the glue that puts it all together. And it's kind of a family of instruments as well, because they're all different. So off-the-shelf controllers, software synthesizers, the sound is being generated on the computer, of course. In one of these, the one that I'm going to demonstrate next, I wrote my own synthesizer, and that's where the sound comes from. In others, I use plugins. I use plugin effects, and the thing I was just showing you is quite a number of effects. What I'm doing in the software is I'm basically making the choices of how I map these different control dimensions onto different aspects of the sound. How do you want to control the sound? And I'll talk later on in this about some of the challenges in doing that. But broadly speaking, the thing is, how do you do this for maximum expressivity? One of the things I'm interested in is making it highly expressive, trying to get a wide range of sounds very expressively, and also making it reasonably intuitive so it's not too hard to learn. There's some algorithmic behavior in it as well. I've done a little bit of algorithmic music work in Max, so I sometimes design in actual musical, if you like, note-based behavior. I'll demonstrate one of those as well. But in something like what I just showed you, I'm basically triggering, well, with the pitch sound you had, I'm triggering that note each time I blow on the breath controller. The drums then, the patterns you were hearing are somewhat algorithmic. Sorry, my mouth gets dry blowing the same. The name, by the way, Poikilophone, comes from a Greek root, and I thought it was a nice name for this because poikilo means varied or diverse or irregular or motley or many-colored or spotty, and I just thought, yeah, it's kind of a whole collection of pieces, and it is a family, as I say, of different things. I'll just say a little bit more about so what's going on is the controllers are coming in. If I can do I have a cursor here? Yeah, you can see that cursor. Yeah, good. So the controllers come into the computer. Blue here is the computer. They come in as MIDI messages. Typically, what I'm using, these devices are MIDI devices over USB. So you connect. I've got two USB hubs here. They're connected into that. They send MIDI messages, MIDI controller messages for people, mostly is what's used for those who know MIDI. I then process all of that stuff in my software, glue, if you like, that puts it together, and pass on then in modified messages to the software synthesizers and samplers. I also pass on control to effects. Yeah, that was quite strong in that. You notice when I put my hand up, that rising effect, that was an effect, a plug-in effect called Valhalla Shimmer. And I'm sending the control onto that. So my stuff, as I say, is kind of the glue, but it's fairly complex glue. That's the patch for what you just heard, for what I was just playing. And by the way, that's not even all of it that you see there, because some of these pieces are exploded out into other patches. So for example, let's see, there's one of them here. Yeah, that's one little part of that big patch. Down here, that's not me. I was worried there for a moment. This is part of that big patch you saw, and this is that exploded out. So there are other layers of complexity below the surface, but it gets quite complicated, actually. There's some other parts of this is all part of what you just heard of the patch of And another thing I've done recently, because somebody I know is another musician is taking over some of this and is going to be playing on it, I hope. And so I developed this UI for it to basically give you more indication of what's going on, help you set it up at the beginning, and also to kind of give you some feedback while you're playing. The sound you heard, I'll do that in a moment. The sound you heard, the pitch sound was coming from this synth plugin called Generate. I didn't build this. I buy, whenever I can get something off the shelf, I do so. So that I'm working on the pieces that are unique. I'm not trying to create my own sounds. I also didn't create the drum sound. So the drum sounds come from Contact. It takes a moment to boot up here. So let me talk a bit about how the different dimensions are mapped here. So the first thing is when I breathe, of course, it's bringing in that pitch sound. And you can probably guess already what my head movement, my head nod is doing, right? It's actually doing two things. If I put my head very high, I get a high note. If I put very low, I get a low note. But if I then move my head after the note starts, it doesn't play a new note, it bends the note. So. So another thing that I'm doing, my head tilt, by the way, in this particular version for the Poikilophone, a lot of things do several different things. So everything, all these movements change the timbre, even the breath as I blow harder, it's doing complex things. It's a lovely complex synth that I'm using. And so there are many things I can control about the sound. But the main thing with the head tilt side to side is it's controlling the attack and release time. So slow attack. Of course, I look like a totally crazy person doing this. I realize that. That's half the fun. But when I tilt my head to the left here now, I get short attack. So short attack and release. So I can do things that wind players will recognize, like double tonguing. I used to play French horn, so you're in the double tongue. Then I have drums on here, just waving. Drums, right? I also have a more aggressive drums that happen when I tap. So that's some of what this does. Another thing that you'll hear it in a better one that I'll show later, but I can control the set of pitches, not the overall pitch, but if you like, pitch class, for those who know what that means. The scales, the choice of, is it pentatonic or whatever, by tilting my finger. There I did what often happens is I tilt my head when I mean to tilt my finger, but I'll try not to do it. That's octaves. If you the number there, you'll see this. You see that number there? That's the pitch. When it's 0, it's actually playing a kind of blues scale. When I move it up, it's playing semitones. But I'll show you this more. Anyway, so the drums, and then the final ingredient really in that is on the foot pedal. When I bring in the foot pedal, I can then I bring in this effect Valhalla Shimmer, and I can bend that up. The tilt does two things. So let me do this. I'll try and finish. Another thing that I was doing there was just very quickly switching between the different sounds. Part of what I'm trying to do is have this huge sonic space where I can kind of navigate quickly between very different sounds. Okay. Oh, thank you. So one of the reasons I kept coming back to that little phrase was to show that I could go from these incredibly harsh, distorted, huge sounds across this vast sonic space and instantly come back. You know, I can. So let me actually just illustrate this a little. I'll leave out the backing now. Backing just helps me a bit when I'm playing. Let's see now. So. And then I can immediately go to. And I've got wonderful control. So the first thing is the huge dynamic range from the breath, right? And then as I breathe harder, the timbre gets brighter, but I have even more timbral control when I move my head up. So that brings in actually a vocal format filter. So. It's invoked a very strange neck movement. I guess a good neck exercise. I have to put my head back to bring it in, and then I'm controlling its pitch as I move it around. And that's, of course, I was doing. I shouldn't even say, of course, but it was obvious. What I was doing here when I did that kind of, it sounded like talking. I wasn't talking when I did this. It's like this crazy babble, right? All I'm doing is I'm just double tonguing. I'm going da 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 da, you know, and then as I move my head, this more vocal form moves around. Yeah, so the breath is controlling loudness. And by the way, I love using breath. I don't think it's just because I started playing. I was playing French horn when I was young. It's not just because I'm a wind player. It's because it's the most natural way to control loudness. We've been doing it since the very first sound we made, since we were babies. It's just natural. You can just shape a phrase. You can do things like sforzando piano and up to fortissimo equal. Which of course, almost impossible to do that on a keyboard. And even using this ROLI, which I should say a bit more about, but I will more. Even though it's got aftertouch, that's not a good way to control that kind of thing. I've tried. The breath is so much better. So I'm going. Right, as you would on the music. So I explained what the head nod and the head tilt are doing. The ROLI, of course, I'm controlling pitch. You notice the vibrato. So I can do that rather nice sort of theremin kind of imitation. It does everything the theremin does, but I think better. And that's not really thanks to me. That's thanks to the ROLI itself. It's just part of how it works. I should go back to the previous slide. You can kind of see there, I think it's kind of a keyboard. It's got both a continuous pitch zone and then these, it's got two continuous pitch zones and a discrete zone. So you can play chords. Press a little too hard. But anyway, you've got continuous pitch. You can very quickly go. But you can slide as well, right? So you've got these two kinds of pitch control, and then it has other things it can do. I'm actually using when I slide my finger from the front. Between the front and the back, and bringing in a sort of delay effect. It's a little subtle. Well, I think you hear it up here. That's at the front of the go. it's actually, it's bringing in the delay. It's also doing some filtering. There's some other stuff I'm doing, but that's the main ones. And then on the foot pedal, I'm just using a classic distortion, like a guitarist, you know. So I can go from, I can immediately go. Aha, wait. I pressed the wrong pedal. I was thinking that. You try that again. That's the distortion of the guitar. I see some people reaching for their ears, so sorry about that. I think before I move on, I'll go on to another version of this, but any questions about this one before I...
Yeah, the question on the
yes, oh, sorry, yeah. I should have asked you before.
how do you connect access to these plugins or the box, right?
To get Max to talk to the plugins.
Yeah.
There is a thing called a VST object in Max, and you just embed the plugin in there. So, for example, let me get you one here. Might not be the best example, but I'm going to bring up something here that I didn't actually use when I was playing this, but I have tried using this with ROLI Equator, which is a plugin from the company that does this keyboard. And so you see where my cursor is there? That's the VST object. This is actually a multi-channel VST object, which is why it says MCS.VST. When I double click on that, it opens up that synth. So you just basically embed the plugins into the Max pack. This here is the control software for this ring. This ring, the Genki ring, which comes from Iceland of all places, this is the software that runs it. And then you can see the different dimensions. You see the one on the left there, the tilt. So that's the tilt, right? And then you see the roll. It's actually going the opposite way to how I'm rolling, at least. But that's it. So, and then the pan, which is like this, which I don't use very much. An interesting detail is that when it comes to the tilt and the roll, it knows where gravity is. So gravity aligns it, so it stays aligned. With the pan, gravity is the same, right? So it drifts out of alignment. The pan is not as useful as the tilt and the roll. But anyway, that's just a little detail. So, what am I doing there? So this differs from the ones I played earlier in that now when I breathe, it's playing multiple notes. So the speed of the notes are controlled by my head tilt. Don't worry too much about the scale you're hearing at the moment. I'll explain that in a moment. And then what's happening is pitch, like the one I had earlier, is the overall pitch is coming from my head up and down, right? And then one of the details, well, not really a detail, but another thing I have control of is I can control the pitch class set. So I like the one earlier, but this is a better illustration of it. So here you can hear that's a pentatonic scale. When I twist my finger to the right, when that number, you see where it says Genki roll over there, over here. When that becomes 1, I'm getting every semitone. A very, very simple algorithm, actually, this. In fact, the entire patch for this particular version of Poik is much simpler than the ones I showed you before. This is the whole thing. There's no hidden levels below that. The others all have these multiple layers, but this one is simpler. And so the algorithm for the pitch is actually very simple. So pentatonic, when it says 0. Then semitones. I'll really do this so that I've got better control of it. I have to sit down for this. If I go to 2, I get a whole tone scale. Bit of Debussy there, if you like. Minor thirds, so diminished 7th chord. And so on and so on and so on. If I go all the way here, I get octave. And then another detail is that I've got control of the note duration from the tilt. So long note. When I say long, I'm not talking, the speed of triggering, remember, is on the tilt, but the duration of each note, staccato or legato, is dependent on my finger position. So. And the sound, I'm just using a piano patch, as you can hear, right? And I mean, I'm not trying to make this a piano. There's all kinds of things you could do on a piano that you can't possibly do with this. On the other hand, I can do a few things with this that a piano cannot do, right? So it's like a rethinking of a piano, if you like. Let me just talk a little bit more about the overall design goals of what I'm trying to do. So I'm aiming for this very wide timbral and expressive range, as you can hear. Not in that last one, but in the first 2 that I demonstrated. Rapidly navigable. So going back to what I showed you in one earlier, where I went from that huge distorted guitar sound to a very gentle kind of Shalimar clarinet maybe or something, that kind of timbre. And by the way, I'm not trying to imitate real instruments. Of course, I'm trying to create new sounds. So when I say Shalimar clarinet, that's just a kind of giving you a rough idea which sound I'm talking about. I'm not saying I'm trying to make it sound like Shalimar clarinet. Another thing that's really key is this idea of this continuous space. I don't like to be switching things. I like a complete space where I can move smoothly from any point to any point. So with different gestures, it's all just there, as it is on an instrument. There's too much with synthesizers and electronic music of switching patches, switching things, It's either this or it's this. I want to be able to do all the stuff in between in this multi-dimensional space. So that's what part of what I'm trying to do. And then key as well is making it reasonably intuitive, using things like breath to control amplitude, which is such a natural thing. It's still, it's taking me a while to get to this stage, and I feel like I'm still scratching the surface of this. I haven't really put in the hours to really learn to play these well, but there's, they're instruments and you need to practice them as well. But I try to make that learning curve as quick as possible by making it pretty intuitive. I can say a little bit more for the slightly more technical for a moment, but don't worry, I won't stay technical very long. Just a little bit more about some of the desirable design features when you're doing this thing of finding how to control sonic parameters from physical parameters. You've got physical parameters like this or something, and you're mapping that to sonic characteristics. Or dimensions, if you like. I sometimes call it dimensions. One of the things you want in general is, by the way, there are exceptions to probably all of these, but in general, one thing you want is sort of perceptual independence or orthogonality, as they would call it mathematically. Orthogonal dimensions are like X and Y and Z, you know. Going along one doesn't affect the others. And also, another part of orthogonality is what, let's say, Y does should not depend on where you are on X. You know, if Y does something down here and then you, or sorry, I should do this way, right? If Y, let's do Y vertically. If Y does something like that, if it sounds like it's doing something here, and then I move along on X and I do something, it should feel like it's doing the same thing in terms of sound. Now, this is subjective. It's mathematical, but it's also highly subjective. And what do we mean by doing the same thing? That's a deep question of psychoacoustics, that ultimately you just follow your musical intuition on what is the same thing. But anyway, that's one of the things. Another thing is perceptual consistency. You know, if you move, do a certain movement, you tilt your head, it should feel like when I move my head here, it's doing the same thing as when I move it over here. The whole thing should be consistent across the range. Another one is perceptual monotonicity, again, to use the mathematical term. If you feel like something's increasing as you do this, it should keep increasing. It shouldn't at some points go down and stop. You know, it should feel like it's going in the same direction. So that's desirable in general. And another one is perceptual linearity, and this is actually one that you end up doing. I end up doing a lot of tweaking to get this right, which is if I move my head by a certain amount over here, and I move it by the same amount over here, it should have roughly the same amount of sonic effect. What tends to happen very often when you first connect things is you find you've got all the control here, and then nothing much happens over here, right? So you want to try and make sure that the control is really spread out across the space. Linearity. What does it involve? How do I do it? It's mostly simple maths. It's a lot of just scaling things. Max makes that very easy. They have a nice scale object, you can scale it. But very often things like the linearity involve simple equations like taking logarithms, exponentiating, a lot of experimenting with the exponents and all that sort of thing. Sometimes sometimes you raise the control input to a power. Sometimes you raise a power to the control input. You raise a number to the control. You know, you're doing n to the. What am I trying to say? If X is the control input, I might do X to the power. That sometimes works, but other times I might say, no, I'm going to do 2 to the X, right, or 10 to the X or something like that. So some simple maths. That's basically what it does. And guided by musical intuition and a lot of experimentation. Okay, one more thing I want to show you. How are we doing for time here? Oh, we're good. This is something completely different, not really the Poikilophone at all. I call it the rhythm engine. It's very much work in progress, this. So if you can program a conventional drum machine, let me say something first of all. Currently, this is limited to 4/4 time. Each bar divided into 16. It's basically one bar, which is 90%, 95% of popular music, and many drum machines basically just do that. Everything I'm doing here, I'm basically deciding on the hit strength of each semiquaver in the bar. You know, da 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 da. That's your 16 notes, right? The way you would control a conventional drum machine, you would just turn up the drums on the beats you want. So if I put this to the direct mode, I'll leave the metronome for now, but I'll switch it off soon. I'm just going to put it I'm going to put the bass drum on different beats here. And so on. And it's quite a tedious process. You're building up the drums, explicitly saying where you want every hit to be. Now I can do that. That's what I'm showing here. But what I'm really about here is a totally different way of controlling drums. So first of all, I'm going to do here is bring up what I call the straight slider. If I just point out something here, it might help. The sliders now and everything else I'm showing have different purposes. They're not positions in the bar. And the names here, which are kind of small to see, but those are an indication of what the sliders do. So I'm just going to bring up the straight slider. I'm just bringing it up and down so you get a rough idea. Let me switch off the metronome then, and I'll bring in some other drums and then explain a little more. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing up different patterns on different drums. I could, of course, bring up the same pattern on all the drums. Very interesting. I'm bringing up different patterns. And a key principle is that most of the sliders, as I move them up, increase the density of the hits. Let me reset this. You notice we're going right back to the first one. I'll put a different drum on it, maybe on the snare drum. When I bring it up just slightly, it's hitting on the first beat of the bar. You can see it in the blue bars there, right? First beat. If I bring it up a bit more, it's pinging on the third beat, then on every beat, then on every half beat, finally on every beat, right? So, but they do it in different ways. So here, this one, for example, generally brings up the density, but in much slightly more complex behavior. So this is offbeats. So you can kind of think of the third beat of the bar as an offbeat, then 2 and 4, then every offbeat, right? You won't really hear that very well unless you start the metronome. So it's on every offbeat, right? And I bring it up even more, it goes up to the offbeat semiquavers, which is very interesting. So, but it's bringing up the density. Another one I can bring up is this one I call this one Funk A. Let me switch off the metronome and put I'm going to just give us what they call 4 on the floor, which is at the bass drum on every beat. And then I'm going to bring up, listen to the snare drum here, I'm going to bring up a different pattern. Slowly bringing it up. So that's one sort of funky pattern where there are groups of threes, 3 semiquavers if you like. And the others. Let me say what's a key concept here, and then I'll show you an even clearer example of it. Sorry, just let me do this first of all. I think I'll reset. I'll put it on. Let's do this. Okay, then I'm going to bring up another drum in a minute, and you'll see that a different way. I've got different generation schemes, but one of the common factors in these generation schemes is the idea of rhythm frequency. We think of sound as having frequency, and of course, and overtones are multiples of a certain frequency. When you notice in rhythm, it's quite analogous, right? I mean, octaves in sound are doubling the frequency, right? In rhythm, we often double the frequency. I mean, that's what we're doing there, right? So you can think of these as being octaves of rhythm frequency. This has nothing to do with sonic frequency. This is the frequency of the hits. You can talk about, a hit on every beat, or you can talk about a frequency of 4 hits in a bar, or 16 hits in a bar. So one of the guiding principles here in this is the idea of thinking of rhythm as a frequency. And you'll see this even better in the next one I'm going to show you here. I'll keep this simple as a backing. Okay, very, very simple backing, just so we've got a reference point. Now let me go to one of these drums. Use that one. What you're seeing there actually in the pattern, on that, whatever that instrument, claves or something, what you're seeing there is part of a cosine wave. That's half of a cosine, right? If I turn up, as I turn it up, you'll notice then the frequency increasing, but you'll see the cosine waveform very clearly. So it jumps between, there's half a cycle, now there's double the frequency. Now, once you think of a frequency, you can then do what we would do with sound, which is you can do things like FM. So you can modulate the frequency with something else. So now I'll do a very simple modulation, just modulating with a ramp. So let me take a fairly low frequency. I think I'll just show you first and then I'll play it. What I'm going to do then is bring up this slider, which keeps the frequency at the beginning the same, but the frequency as the bar continues, the frequency becomes higher. Can you see that? You see there, there's one whole cycle, but now you notice how the beginning of the bar is not changing, but the end of the bar is changing because the frequency is going faster. Maybe if I start from a different position, you'll see even more clearly. There's where we go? There's two cycles, I think. Oh, I'm not quite in the pain. Okay, I'll reset this. Wait, let me reset this one. Which means I have to turn this up. As this is work in progress, it's still a bit clunky. But so there's kind of two cycles. Now, when I ramp up the frequency, you can see that right towards the end of the bar, the frequency is higher. I think you can see that, right? It's a little bit hidden. It's hidden by the fact, of course, that there's only 16 positions, but nevertheless, it's interesting. So when I play that. Anyway, so I've got these different schemes for controlling the patterns. But there's another level now where this gets more interesting. I'm going to take one I prepared earlier, as they say in cooking programs. Let's start this playing. Okay, what I have here, I have 4 different patterns. I'm just going to let you hear the 4 patterns first. That's 1, number 2, number 3 is almost a bit of a joke, but just very sparse. Right? Number 4. But now what's cool is I can morph between these. I can move. You see this blue area up here? I'm going to move smoothly between these patterns. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Stop one. And even better, the morphing there is really just like a kind of mixing. It's really like a crossfade. But what I can also do when this is green, instead of crossfading the audio, what I'm doing is I'm interpolating. It's a bit more than that, but let's call it interpolating. I'm interpolating the positions of the sliders. So now you get a much more convincing morph. Maybe I'll do this one. In case I lost you there, let's go between 3 and 4. So there's 3. There's 4. I can morph between them with the simple fading morph. in the middle, it's kind of messy. You know, everything's playing kind of in between volume, not very interesting. If instead what I do is I go to the green one, now the midpoint is more interesting. And then let's see, of course, with this is a slight connection with the Poikilophone, but I do want to connect these things much more later. I've got that. Let's see, I just need to connect this. Oh, I've got this. Okay. You see the green area there. You can see what I'm doing. It's very obvious. Those examples are all at the same tempo, but of course I can have ones that are different tempos, tempi. Let's change to different drum set. That one is just a very basic drum set, but I'll open up. Let me think again. How do I do that? Switch here. This might be a little loud. Maybe I can. Maybe this one I think I can maybe control the volume of. I'm going to open up the. So I'm actually using Contact. Contact's a sampler, and I'm using the sampler plugin. Here's the drum kit for that. And if you want something a bit less conventional, here, instead of using that drum set, here's a sort of drum set that I created myself, which is a set of construction sounds, which I chopped up into samples and mapped onto the drum kit. So now we get a completely different thing. That's both together, drum. So yeah, that's everything I want to show you. I just want to say at the end that, by the way, I'm looking for people to collaborate with on this. I'm looking for players and improvisers. I'm more of a boffin. I'm happiest designing this stuff and, you know, kind of inventing and designing. I'd love to have other people come with me and work with me on this who are better players. Composers, of course, is the Composers Society. And thanks, by the way, so much to the Composers Society for offering me this opportunity to show you this. Co-developers, perhaps, and for technical people. People, you know, maybe people that just want to sort of advocate about this kind of product evangelists, as they would call it in the commercial world. Although I'm not trying to make this commercial. I've done that. I've started companies. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been there, done that, run a company, built a company up to 80 people. I don't want to do that again. It was not fun. This is much more fun. My co-founder's over there. He's laughing. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not, you know, musical experience, yes, to an extent necessary, I think, for this, but not necessarily in any conventional sense. Technical expertise, no, but you do need technical patience and enthusiasm. You need to kind of enjoy this stuff and be willing to learn new stuff. Another thing, I'm willing to help with the cost of this. These bits and pieces cost, you know, they cost a bit. They're not super expensive, but, you know, something like this, by the time you ship it from Europe, it's like $500 kind of price. So for somebody who comes with for a small number of people who are really dedicated, I'm willing to basically fund this, to get the controllers, to help with the software licenses as well, like for Macs and things like that. So if any of you are interested, there's my email address. Drop me an email or give me a call. Thank you.
Question. All this deterministic. So if you put all these sensors on the drone or a robot and it did the exact same tube low pitch, will it play the exact same music?
Well, exact same. Of course, you wouldn't move the drone exactly the same way as you'd move your body. And this all.
I say the drone because it's
Yeah. So no. I mean, basically, yeah. I mean, yaw pitch roll from this as a drone yaw pitched and rolled, it would control this. You could do that.
and it's deterministic.
Well, so I think these are two separate questions. One question is, could you take what I'm controlling with the body and put it on anything else? Yes, absolutely anything else. I mean, it's something that this could just be attached to anything. Or you could alternatively take some other information from the drone and map it to these devices. So that's one question. The question of deterministic, most of what I showed you today, with a few minor exceptions, is entirely deterministic. If you do the exact identical gestures, you will get the same result. There's a little bit of randomness in some of this, but most of it's not. And the reason I don't introduce much randomness is there's enough randomness in how you perform.
Yeah.
I mean, playing conventional instruments, we struggle against randomness, if you like, right? There's always, you're trying to actually limit that. So it's you're not making mistakes, you're not doing other things, right? In electronic music, often you introduce randomness to make it more interesting and human. But there's enough randomness in the gestures. So I think it's
So you can have the dancer dance to the music that she's creating for the dance in real time.
Yes, and controlling the music by dancing. And but that idea is not new. People have been doing that since the 1960s, I think, at least, where dancers come. And I remember seeing Laurie Anderson in London. She was doing dancing, hitting her body and stuff with triggering sounds. What's amazing today is that this stuff has become affordable. It's become much more powerful. We're really in a kind of golden age, I think, of electronic music systems. Also, the software, the synthesizers, the sounds we can make are so rich compared to what they used to be. So I think that's, but the basic ideas of doing this kind of thing go way, way back decades. Yeah.
I had an experience with some 10 years ago designing some patches, Lead Max. But my hardware that I used was Lead Motion. So the issue I had was after a few years, they just stopped and also the compatibility with OS X, right? There's OD involved.
Yeah.
And so this kind of becomes an issue for a lot of like
I know.
So what's your thinking about this? Like these are companies that are how would we predict the obsolescence of this product? It's quite tricky.
It is tricky. I mean, so for example, ROLI, the people that do this, by the way, these two devices just click together. But this is the ROLI C robot. They actually went into they became insolvent. They went into receivership and they've come back from that. So you're right. You know, one of the things I do is I just decided if I'm going to invest the huge amount of time I do in this, I'm also going to invest a bit of money in buying some spares. So I've just, ROLI's come back to life and I've just ordered 2 more of these. I've got 3 breath controllers and things like that because I just feel like, you know, I mean, I guess I'm the stage in life, I've got a bit of money to do that. Not a great deal, but, you know, I can afford to do that. That's the only answer.
If I may share, also keep my 2009 MacBook Pro. Some of the patches work there. I cannot use it with my parents' house. So
I know. Yeah, no, this stuff's a nightmare. I mean, I'm afraid there's no easy answer to that. Things become obsolete. Companies, particularly in electronic music, companies come and go like crazy. So it's. Having said that, there's a whole community of people out there who are resurrecting stuff. I actually worked on something back in the 1980s. I started a company and we did a thing called the Zythos MPS, and it was used by some famous people. And there's a bit, if you go online and you search on this, you'll find there's a kind of a bunch of legend. One of the famous people, the first person who used it live was Vangelis, the composer. What in the last 2 years, I'm suddenly getting people coming in from Europe saying, we want to recreate this. And I've connected these people, and a group are actually doing that. They're recreating this. They're actually doing different levels of recreation. Some are actually, some of what they're doing is they're recreating it using the original components and processors and everything, like a Z80 4 megahertz processor. Absolutely, literally recreating it. Then they're also saying, okay, now let's replace the processor with a modern processor, but keep the outside the same. And then on top of that, they're planning to then develop it further and do new things. So there are people, there is a community of people in the world who kind of resurrect these old systems. But yeah, no, it's sorry?
Just cross fingers.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and just buy spares. I mean, you kind of need to anyway, because, my fear today coming in was one of these dies. So I carried the spare. Having said that, I found everything actually generally very reliable. So not too bad. Yeah, sorry. You had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for this amazing talk. Electronic musical instruments, it's certainly opened my eyes to different types of instruments which are really, really unconventional, like the sounds you're instrument. I've got a very technical question, not sure if anyone can represent. So if you represent a rhythm, in the rhythm you see that there are 16 slots and 16 semi-quavers, and then you represent it as a 16-dimensional vector where all the components are between 0 and 1. So does the slightest area rhythm machine provide as a basis for all the vectors inside that vector cube?
Well, so I know what you're asking about is completeness in the mathematical
Yes.
sense. Yeah, okay, so some of my generations, this gets a bit geeky, but some of my generation schemes, obviously the one where you're directly controlling as you do in a conventional drum machine, that covers the entire space of possibilities. I use another generation scheme, which I didn't show today, called Walsh functions. And the Walsh functions also provide a complete coverage of that space. But the ones I did show you today are not going to be complete. It's hard for me to know where the gaps are. That would become mathematics that's way beyond me. But those are more intuitive, and I kind of look for what's interesting. And if it does, it doesn't have to cover all the space of possibilities to be interesting. No musical instrument covers all the space of possibilities. One of the things I am going to do, I'm about to, my wife and I are going off on a trip. I do these digital nomad trips when I travel for a few months. We settle down in a nice place, and I carry with me my computer and a couple of screens, and I'm going to extend this beyond just 4/4. I want to extend it to things like, complex time signatures, 2 + 2 + 3, 8. 7/8 divided that way, 7/8 and 11/8 and all these, and then fractional time signatures, so that you get phasing in the Steve Reich sense, things phase against each other. I want to do that stuff as well. But did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thanks very much.
Okay, sure. I think we're over time, so I should definitely wrap it up. But please come and talk to me if there's any questions. Thank you.